The first drop of coffee splashed onto the counter as Ellie's hand trembled. She could hear them snickering before she turned around. Those college boys in their perfectly pressed varsity jackets, pointing at the burn scars that crawled across her cheek like spiderwebs. The tallest one, James, flicked his silver lighter open and closed, his smile cruel as he mimicked being burned. Ellie's knuckles whitened around the serving tray. 6 more hours on shift. 6 more hours of pretending their words didn't cut deeper than the flames ever had. Before we dive into this story, I'm curious. Where in the world are you watching from right now? And what time is it there? Drop it in the comments below. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button so you never miss a twist. Ellie Mason's alarm blared at 4:30 a.m., the same as every morning. Her small apartment above Mercer Street was quiet, except for that persistent buzz. She silenced it quickly and shuffled to the bathroom mirror. The morning ritual never changed. Careful application of thick makeup over the burn scars that covered the right side of her face. 23 years old, and already an expert at hiding. Good enough, she whispered, though it wasn't. It never was. The raised pink skin refused to be completely concealed. By 5:45, Ellie was tying her apron at Sonny's diner, the smell of bacon grease and coffee already filling the air. George, the owner, nodded as she clocked in. Counter section today, he said, not meeting her eyes. The counter meant facing customers directly, nowhere to hide. Morning. Sunny side up. Regular customers called their usual greeting. Most were kind enough. Local factory workers and early risers who cared more about hot coffee than staring at her scars. Then there were the others. Like clockwork, 7:30 brought the arrival of James Harrington III and his college friends, sons of the wealthiest families in town. They claimed the same counter seats every Tuesday and Thursday, right in Ellie's section. Well, if it isn't our favorite crispy waitress, James called, loud enough for the entire diner to hear. His friends laughed on cue. Customers looked down at their plates, embarrassed but unwilling to intervene. Ellie approached with her order pad. What can I get for you today? James leaned forward, flicking his silver lighter. I'll have the special, and try not to get too close to the grill, sweetheart. Looks like you've been cooked enough. Fresh laughter. A burning in her chest that had nothing to do with her old injuries. She wrote down their orders without comment, as she had dozens of times before. The morning stretched endlessly before her, refilling coffee cups, dodging cruel jokes, collecting paltry tips left by the college boys who demanded perfect service while mocking her every move. Every new burn joke felt like reopening wounds that had barely healed. But Ellie kept her chin up, kept moving between tables, kept serving with quiet dignity. Because what other choice did she have? The lunch rush had just ended when the bell above the door jingled. Ellie looked up to see an elderly man shuffle in, his clothes wrinkled and unkempt. His eyes darted nervously around the diner, and his hands trembled visibly. George stepped forward, blocking his path. Sir, I think you might be in the wrong place. The old man flinched at George's voice. Just coffee, please, he mumbled. We serve paying customers here, George said firmly. There's a shelter 3 blocks east. Ellie watched the man's face crumple. She recognized something in his expression, the same look she saw in her mirror some mornings, of someone fighting invisible battles nobody else could see. I'll handle this table, George, she said, stepping forward. My section's slow right now. George frowned, but retreated to the kitchen, muttering about charity cases. Ellie led the man to a quiet booth in the corner. Coffee's on the house, she said, noticing the military tattoo peeking from beneath his sleeve. Are you a veteran, sir? He nodded, his eyes finally focusing on her. Korea, name's Frank. I'm Ellie. Would you like something to eat, Frank? His gaze dropped to the tabletop. Don't have enough today. The meatloaf special is good, she said, already writing it down. On me. 20 minutes later, during her break, Ellie slid into the booth across from Frank. He'd eaten everything on his plate. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Most places, they see me coming and lock the door." "I know what it's like when people judge you before knowing you," she replied. Frank studied her face without the typical flinch or quick look away that Ellie had grown accustomed to. She nodded, something in his direct question, refreshing after years of people pretending not to notice. "House fire?" "Orphanage fire," she corrected. 7 years ago. Frank's hand tightened around his coffee cup. "You get the kids out?" "Some of them." The words caught in her throat. "Not all." They sat in understanding silence until Ellie's break ended. As she stood to leave, Frank reached into his pocket and pulled out a tarnished dog tag. "Here," he said, pressing it into her palm. "For kindness. It's not mine, but it means something to me." Ellie accepted the strange gift, tucking it into her apron pocket before returning to work. That night, examining the dog tag under her lamp, she traced the embossed name, Collins, Robert J. Whoever he was, his tag was now a small treasure, the first gift she'd received in years. Frank returned the next day, precisely at 2:15 p.m., and the day after that, always during the afternoon lull, always sitting in the same corner booth. Ellie made sure to take her break during his visits. By the end of the week, he seemed less jumpy, his hands steadier as he sipped his coffee. "You look better today," Ellie noted, sliding into the booth with her own cup. "Sleep better knowing there's somewhere to go," Frank admitted. "Gets lonely in my room." As they talked, Ellie noticed Mrs. Abernathy at a nearby table watching them with interest. The elderly woman had been a regular for years, but rarely spoke beyond placing her order. The next day, Mrs. Abernathy stopped Ellie before leaving. "That veteran, you're good to him," she said, pressing an extra $1 into Ellie's hand. "My Harold was in the Pacific, never the same after." That $1 was just the beginning. Gradually, other regulars began leaving Ellie larger tips. Mr. Peterson, who owned the hardware store, the Jenkins sisters who worked at the library, even Dr. Thompson, who sometimes treated Ellie's scar tissue for free, began leaving an extra quarter with his usual payment. No one mentioned it directly. But Ellie understood. They'd been watching, seeing her kindness to Frank when others wanted him gone. Pipes leaking under the sink. George complained one morning, mopping the bathroom floor. Frank, nursing his usual coffee, looked up. "I could fix that. Used to do plumbing." George hesitated, then shrugged. "Can't make it worse, I suppose." 20 minutes later, Frank emerged with wet sleeves, but a satisfied expression. "All set. Washer was shot." "What do I owe you?" George asked gruffly. "Cup of coffee'll do," Frank replied. The next day, Frank fixed a wobbly table, then a sticking door. Soon, he was spending his afternoons helping around the diner, earning his meals through small repairs that George had been putting off for months. "You're good with your hands," Ellie observed, as Frank reattached a loose chrome strip on the counter. "Keeps the memories away," he said quietly. Then more hesitantly, "When my mind gets too loud, I come here. Seeing you helps." "Me? Why?" Frank glanced at her scars, then met her eyes directly. "Reminds me there's still good people willing to walk through fire for others." The simple words settled in Ellie's chest like a warm coal. That afternoon, as Frank worked on a wobbly stool, Ellie overheard Mrs. Jenkins tell her sister, "That girl's got more kindness in her scarred cheek than most folks have in their whole bodies." For the first time since the fire, Ellie felt something stirring inside her, a sense that perhaps her scars didn't define her after all, at least not to everyone. But as Frank tightened the last screw on the stool, the bell above the door chimed. Ellie's stomach knotted instantly. James Harrington and his friends had arrived for an unexpected visit. "Well, look who it is," James called, striding toward the counter. "Our favorite monster movie Waitress." His 3 companions snickered on cue. They sprawled across the counter stools, taking up more space than necessary. "Coffee, please, Freddy Krueger," James said, his voice carrying through the now silent diner. Ellie grabbed the coffee pot, her hands steady despite the burning in her chest. As she poured, James suddenly jerked his cup, causing coffee to splash across the counter. "Clumsy thing," he smirked. "Better clean that up before someone gets burned." Frank had stopped working on the stool, his knuckles white around the screwdriver. His eyes tracked James with an intensity that made Ellie nervous. "It's fine," she murmured to Frank as she passed with a rag. "I'm used to it." But James had noticed Frank's attention. "Got yourself a boyfriend, Scarface? Didn't know they were casting Beauty and the Beast around here." One of James's friends, Michael, the quiet one, looked uncomfortable but remained silent. Frank stood slowly, his voice low but clear. "Show some respect, boy." James's smile vanished. "What did you say to me, old man?" "Said respect. Something your daddy clearly never taught you." The diner went deadly quiet. Everyone in town knew James's father, Harold Harrington, owned half the businesses downtown and sat on the city council. James stood, towering over Frank. "You don't know who you're talking to." "I know exactly who I'm talking to," Frank replied. "A coward who feels big, making fun of a lady's scars." James's face flushed deep red. "Get this bum out of here," he demanded, looking at George. "Or my father will have the health department shut this dump down faster than you can blink." George emerged from the kitchen, his face pale. "Frank, maybe you should go for today." "He stays," Ellie said firmly, stepping between them. "He's a customer and a veteran who deserves respect." James leaned close to Ellie, his breath hot on her face. "You're making a big mistake. My father can crush this place with one phone call." "Then make your call," she replied, though her heart hammered against her ribs. James knocked his coffee cup to the floor, where it shattered. "Clean that up, freak, and tell your boss to expect visitors from City Hall very soon." As they stormed out, James paused at the door. "I wonder how many health code violations they'll find in this greasy spoon. Probably enough to close you down for good." The silence after they left felt suffocating. "I'm sorry, George," Ellie said, already sweeping up the broken cup. George ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Not your fault, but that boy doesn't make idle threats. His father really could cause trouble." Frank put down his screwdriver. "I should go. Don't want to bring more problems." "No," Ellie said firmly. "You belong here as much as anyone." But as she finished her shift that evening, Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that something had been set in motion, something that might cost her the only job willing to hire a girl with a face like hers. 3 days later, an official letter arrived. George read it with a deepening frown before handing it to Ellie. "Health inspection. Next Tuesday." His voice was tight, unscheduled. Ellie's stomach dropped. James made good on his threat. "His father did," George corrected. "Harold Harrington called the mayor himself, according to my cousin at City Hall." That afternoon, when Frank arrived, Ellie took him to the far corner booth. "I need to ask you something," she said quietly. "The dog tag you gave me. Robert Collins. Who is he?" Frank's eyes darted around the diner before answering. "Bobby was our lieutenant in Korea. Saved our whole unit when we were cut off behind enemy lines." He paused. "Why?" "Just curious why you gave me his tag." "It's complicated." Frank fidgeted with his napkin. "I carry it as a reminder." "Of what?" "That sometimes the people you least expect are the ones who save you." Ellie sensed he wasn't telling her everything, but before she could press further, Frank changed the subject. "Tell me about the fire." "The orphanage." The request startled her. No one ever asked directly about that night. "It was Christmas Eve," she began hesitantly. "I was 16, working in the kitchen, smelled smoke from the east wing, the little one's dormitory." Her throat tightened. "I ran upstairs, Flames everywhere. Got 6 children out before the stairwell collapsed. And that's when you were burned, Frank stated, rather than asked. Ellie nodded, went back in through a window. 2 more children inside. Got them to the window, but she touched her cheek unconsciously. The ceiling came down. I don't remember much after that. Frank was watching her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. The fire marshal ruled it accidental. Faulty wiring. How did you know that? Lucky guess. Old buildings, bad wiring. But something in his voice sounded false. Was the orphanage rebuilt? No. The land was sold to developers. There's a shopping center there now. Frank's expression darkened. Convenient. What do you mean? He leaned forward. Who bought the land, Ellie? The question seemed odd, but she answered, Harrington Development Corporation. She stopped. The connection suddenly obvious. James's father, Frank confirmed. Quite the coincidence. You think? Ellie couldn't finish the thought. It was too horrible to contemplate. I've seen enough coincidences in my life to stop believing in them, Frank said gravely, especially when money's involved. The conversation was interrupted when Michael, the quiet member of James's group, slid into their booth without warning. You need to be careful, he whispered, glancing nervously over his shoulder. James's father is serious about shutting this place down. Why are you telling us this? Ellie asked. Michael couldn't meet her eyes. Because what they're doing isn't right, and he hesitated. I've wanted to say something about how they treat you for a long time. After Michael left, Frank grew quiet, lost in thought. When he finally spoke again, his voice had changed. I need to tell you something, Ellie. I don't have much time left. What do you mean? Cancer. Doctors gave me 3 months. That was 2 months ago. He smiled sadly at her shocked expression. It's okay. I've made peace with it. But before I go, I want to make something right. The health inspection? More than that. Frank's eyes hardened. Much more. As Ellie processed this revelation, the diner's phone rang. George answered, his face growing increasingly pale during the conversation. That was the bank, he announced, after hanging up. They're auditing my loan, claiming there might be irregularities. Frank and Ellie exchanged glances. The Harringtons were moving faster than expected. I should never have stood up to James, Ellie whispered. No, Frank said firmly. Standing up was exactly right, and you're not alone in this fight. But as he gathered his worn coat to leave, Frank swayed slightly, catching himself on the table, a reminder that whatever help he planned to offer came with its own ticking clock. By Thursday, the attacks had escalated. The bank froze George's business account, pending their investigation. The local newspaper ran a small article questioning food safety at several downtown establishments, with Sonny's prominently mentioned. Then the electricity mysteriously went out for 3 hours during the lunch rush. It's a coordinated effort, George said gloomily, as they sat in the empty diner after closing. Harold Harrington wants us gone, and he's using every connection he has. But why? Ellie asked. Just because his son got embarrassed? The Harringtons don't tolerate anyone standing up to them. Never have. Frank hadn't come in for 2 days. Ellie tried not to worry, but the image of him collapsing somewhere alone haunted her. With his cancer diagnosis, each absence carried ominous weight. On Friday morning, George called an emergency staff meeting. I'm sorry, he began, his voice heavy with defeat. I can't fight City Hall and the bank. If Tuesday's health inspection goes badly, we'll have to close. That's not fair, protested Marge, the cook. We run a clean place. Doesn't matter if the inspectors are told what to find, George replied. All eyes turned to Ellie. This is because of me, isn't it? She asked quietly. The painful silence that followed was answer enough. Maybe Rita, the other waitress, started hesitantly. Maybe if Ellie worked in the kitchen instead of out front, Just until this blows over? George couldn't meet Ellie's eyes. I was thinking the same thing. The suggestion hit Ellie like a slap. Hide the scarred girl where customers wouldn't have to look at her. Pretend she was the problem, not the cruelty she faced. I understand, she said, though her throat felt tight. I don't want anyone losing their jobs because of me. Leaving work that evening, Ellie felt hollowed out. The diner was the only place that had hired her after the fire. Without it, where could she go? As she climbed the stairs to her apartment, Mrs. Peterson from the florist shop called out, "Ellie, have you seen that veteran friend of yours? The older gentleman?" "Frank, not for a couple days." "Why?" "He collapsed outside the drugstore yesterday. Ambulance took him away." The news sent Ellie racing to county hospital. At the information desk, she asked for Frank, realizing she didn't even know his last name. "Elderly man, brought in yesterday. Collapse?" The nurse checked her records. "Frank Wilcox, room 317. Ellie found his room easily enough, but it was empty, bed made, no sign anyone had been there. A passing orderly noticed her confusion. "Looking for the old guy? Checked himself out this morning. Against medical advice." "Did he say where he was going?" "Nope. Just muttered something about not having time for this and left." Defeated, Ellie returned to her apartment. Frank was gone. The diner was being systematically destroyed, and she was powerless to stop any of it. That night, she took out the dog tag Frank had given her, turning it over in her fingers. Robert Collins. Just a name that meant nothing to her. On Saturday, George pulled her aside. "Ellie, I've been thinking, maybe it would be better for everyone if you took some time off. Just until after the inspection." The message was clear. She was being let go. "I understand," she said, untying her apron with trembling fingers. She was halfway to the door when George called after her. "It's not personal, Ellie. It's business." But it felt intensely personal as she walked home alone, unemployed, and abandoned by the one person who seemed to understand her. Ellie spent Sunday alone in her apartment, wondering if she should just leave town entirely, start over somewhere new. But the idea of facing a world full of stares and whispers without even Frank's quiet acceptance seemed unbearable. Monday morning, she was washing dishes when a knock came at her door. She opened it to find Michael, the quiet college boy, standing nervously in the hallway. "You need to come with me," he said urgently. "Frank sent me." Michael drove them to a small motel on the edge of town. Room 14's curtains were drawn tight, but Frank opened the door before they could knock. "You came," he said, relief evident in his tired face. The room was transformed into something resembling a war planning center. Maps of the town pinned to walls, newspaper clippings, property records. "What is all this?" Ellie asked, bewildered. "Evidence," Frank replied. "Michael's been helping me gather it." Michael nodded. "My father's a clerk at the county records office. I've been accessing files after hours." "Evidence of what?" Ellie pressed. Frank pointed to a property map. "The orphanage fire. It wasn't an accident." The revelation hung in the air like smoke. 3 months before the fire, Michael explained, Harrington Development tried to buy the orphanage property. They were rejected. The board wanted to keep it as a children's home. Then suddenly, Frank continued, "A convenient fire destroys the building. Insurance doesn't cover full replacement cost. The orphanage board is forced to sell, and Harrington buys the land for half what they originally offered." Michael finished. Ellie sank onto the bed. "You're saying James's father deliberately—" She couldn't complete the sentence. "We can't prove he ordered it," Frank admitted, "but we have documentation showing he paid $10,000 to a man named Curtis Welch 3 days before the fire." "Who's Curtis Welch?" "A known arsonist from Chicago," Michael said quietly. "He died in a car accident 2 weeks after the fire." Ellie's head spun with the implications. Why are you showing me this now? Because we're not the only ones moving pieces on the board, Frank said, gesturing toward the window. Peering through the curtains, Ellie was startled to see a familiar face in a parked car across the street. Mrs. Abernathy from the diner, watching the motel. She's been bringing us coffee, Frank explained, and information. Her son works for the health department. The petition was her idea too, Michael added. Petition. To save the diner. Over 200 signatures so far. Dr. Thompson circulating it. Ellie stared at them in disbelief. All these people are helping? Why? Because they've been watching, Frank said simply. They've seen how you treat people, how you treated me when others wouldn't. But that's not enough to stop Harrington, Ellie protested. No, Frank agreed. But this might be. He pulled out an old photograph showing young soldiers in Korea. That's me, he said, pointing. And that's Bobby Collins. The name from the dog tag. He saved my life in '51. Lost his leg doing it. Now he's Senator Robert Collins. A senator? Ellie's eyes widened. And these men, Frank continued, indicating other faces in the photo. They were our unit. Now they're a federal judge, an FBI director, and the governor's chief of staff. I don't understand. I called in some favors, Frank said with a slight smile. They're coming tomorrow. For the health inspection? For justice. For you. For those kids in the orphanage. Before Ellie could respond, Michael's head snapped up. We have another problem. James knows I've been helping you. He followed me yesterday. How much does he know? Frank demanded. Not everything, but enough to be dangerous. As if summoned by his name, there was a sharp knock at the door. Frank gestured for silence as he peered through the peephole. Harrington, he whispered, and he's not alone. Back door, Frank whispered, pointing toward the bathroom window. Michael, get her out of here. What about you? Ellie protested. I'll be fine. Go. Michael tugged her toward the bathroom. Outside, someone pounded harder on the door. Wilcox, open up. We know you're in there. Ellie hesitated, torn between escape and loyalty to Frank. Go, Frank insisted. The evidence is what matters now. As Michael helped her through the small window, Ellie heard the motel room door splinter open. From her hiding spot behind the dumpster, she watched James Harrington and two larger men enter the room. Meet me at the old boathouse, Michael whispered before disappearing around the corner. Ellie made her way across town, constantly checking to ensure she wasn't followed. The boathouse by the river was abandoned in winter, its weathered boards offering little protection against the bitter wind. Michael arrived 30 minutes later, breathless and frightened. They took everything, he gasped. All the documents, the photos. And Frank? Michael shook his head. They roughed him up. I heard them say they were taking him to have a conversation with Harold Harrington. We have to help him. How? James's father practically owns the police chief. Ellie paced the creaking floorboards. What about your copies of the evidence? I didn't make any. Michael looked miserable. I never thought they'd find us. They sat in defeated silence as dusk settled over the river. Everything Frank had gathered was gone. Without evidence, his powerful friends would have nothing to act on. As night fell, unexpected headlights appeared on the access road. Ellie and Michael crouched behind rotting fishing equipment, hearts pounding. The car door opened. Ellie, it's James. She exchanged alarmed glances with Michael. I know you're in there, James continued. I'm alone. I just want to talk. Against Michael's whispered protests, Ellie stepped into view. What do you want? James stood awkwardly in the headlights. My father sent me with an offer. Where's Frank? He's fine, resting comfortably at the hospital. Father made sure he got the best care. Ellie didn't believe him for a second. What's the offer? It's simple, James said, his usual arrogance subdued. You leave town tonight. In exchange, the diner stays open, George keeps his loan, and your veteran friend gets full treatment for his cancer at Mercy Hospital. And if I refuse, the diner closes tomorrow. Your friends lose their jobs. And Frank, James let the implication hang in the cold air. Why does your father care so much about one waitress? James shifted uncomfortably. He doesn't like loose ends, especially ones connected to the orphanage. So it was true. The Harringtons were responsible for the fire that scarred her and killed 3 children. I need time to think, Ellie said. You have until morning, James replied, turning back toward his car. Be smart about this, Ellie. Some fights can't be won. After he left, Michael emerged from hiding. You can't seriously be considering his offer. What choice do I have? Everyone I care about will suffer if I stay. But the truth about the orphanage will die with Frank if something happens to him. Ellie finished. Without evidence, it's just accusations. That night, Ellie barely slept. She dragged her small suitcase to the diner before opening. George was surprised to see her. Ellie, what are you doing here? I work here, she said firmly, tying on her apron. But I thought, I'm not hiding anymore, George. Not in the kitchen, not out of town. The health inspectors can come. James and his father can do their worst. But I won't run. George studied her face. You know they'll close us down. Maybe, she acknowledged. But some things are worth standing for. As the morning light streamed through the windows, Ellie began her normal routine, brewing coffee, setting tables, preparing for customers who might never come. Whatever happened next, she would face it with the same dignity she'd maintained through years of stares and whispers, the same courage that had sent her into a burning building to save children, the same heart that had reached out to a lonely veteran when no one else would. The health inspectors arrived precisely at 10 a.m., 2 stern-faced men in gray suits, clipboards in hand. Behind them came James and his college friends, smirking as they claimed their usual counter seats. We'll be observing every aspect of your operation today, the lead inspector announced loudly. Any violations will be noted and addressed. George nodded nervously, sweat beading on his forehead. The morning customers quickly paid their bills and left, sensing trouble. Soon only James's group remained, watching with obvious satisfaction. Coffee, gentlemen? Ellie asked the inspectors, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. After we check your storage areas, one replied coldly. For the next hour, they meticulously examined every corner of the diner, making exaggerated notes about minor issues. A cracked tile, a smudged light fixture. James whispered comments to his friends, laughing each time the inspectors found something new to criticize. By noon, George looked defeated. The inspectors had compiled a lengthy list of supposed violations, many clearly fabricated. Tell me, miss, the lead inspector said suddenly, looking directly at Ellie's scarred face. Do you think your condition meets health code standards for food service workers? The cruelty of the question silenced the entire diner. Even James's friends looked uncomfortable. Before Ellie could respond, the bell above the door jingled. Everyone turned to see Frank, standing there, bruised but upright, wearing a clean suit that seemed too big for his thin frame. What an interesting question, Frank said calmly. I'd be curious to hear which specific health code addresses burn scars. The inspector flushed. This is an official inspection. You can't interfere. I'm not interfering, Frank replied. I'm waiting for my guests. As if on cue, the sound of car doors slamming came from outside. Through the window, Ellie saw 4 black SUVs parked in front of the diner. James stood abruptly. What's going on? What have you done? The door opened again. A distinguished gray-haired man entered first, followed by several serious-looking men in dark suits. The atmosphere in the diner instantly changed. Senator Collins, the lead inspector, stammered, recognition dawning on his face. That's right, the senator confirmed. and you are conducting what appears to be a politically motivated inspection of this establishment. Sir, we're just following orders. From Harold Harrington, I presume? Another man stepped forward, displaying an FBI badge. We'd like to discuss those orders in detail. James's face had gone pale. My father had nothing to do with this. Really? Frank pulled a small tape recorder from his pocket. Because I recorded your entire conversation at the motel yesterday, including your admission about the orphanage fire. Ellie gasped. Frank had been prepared all along. You can't prove anything, James insisted, though his voice shook. Actually, Senator Collins interjected. We have Curtis Welch's widow. She kept very detailed records of your father's payments, and she's quite eager to testify. One of the FBI agents approached James. We'll need you to come with us. Your father is already being questioned downtown. As James was led out, Senator Collins turned to Ellie. Miss Mason? I've been looking forward to meeting you. Senator, she acknowledged, confused by his interest. Frank told me how you've been helping him. But what he didn't mention, Collins paused, emotion crossing his face, is that we've met before. We have? Christmas Eve, 7 years ago, I was visiting my nephew at St. Mary's Orphanage when the fire broke out. His voice grew husky. You pulled him from the third-floor window. Timothy Collins. He's in college now, thanks to you. Ellie's hand flew to her scarred cheek. Timothy? He survived? Yes. And he never forgot the young woman who saved him, even as the ceiling collapsed on her. The diner had gone completely silent. Even the health inspectors stood frozen, realizing the gravity of their mistake. The Harringtons will face justice, the senator continued, for the fire, for the intimidation, for everything. Frank stepped forward, placing a hand on Ellie's shoulder. I told you sometimes, the people you least expect are the ones who save you. You planned this all along, she whispered. From the moment you showed me kindness when no one else would, Frank confirmed. I recognized something in you, the same courage Bobby showed in Korea when he dragged me to safety with enemy fire all around. But your evidence was already safely delivered to the FBI. Frank smiled. The papers James's men took were decoys. We needed them to think they'd won. As the reality of what was happening sank in, George approached Senator Collins. Does this mean the diner is safe? More than safe, the senator assured him. I think you'll find the health department suddenly very reasonable, and the bank's audit will mysteriously resolve in your favor. The rest of the day passed in a blur. News vans arrived as word spread of Harold Harrington's arrest. Former orphanage residents came forward with their own stories. The diner filled with curious townspeople, many stopping to apologize to Ellie for years of silent complicity. By closing time, the 4 black SUVs remained parked outside, a silent reminder that sometimes justice arrives when you least expect it. As Frank prepared to leave with Senator Collins, he pulled Ellie aside. My offer still stands, Collins told her. A position at my foundation for burn survivors. Your experience would be invaluable. I'll think about it, Ellie promised. But for now, this is home, Frank finished for her. I understand. He pressed something into her palm, the dog tag she'd returned to him earlier. Keep it, he insisted, to remember that kindness always finds its way back to the giver. Spring came to town with unusual vibrancy that year. The diner's windows sparkled in the April sunshine as Ellie arranged fresh flowers on each table. Special occasion? George asked, noticing her care with the arrangements. Frank's coming home today, she replied with a smile. The cancer treatments in Washington had been successful. Not a cure, but time stolen back from the disease. Enough time, the doctors said, for Frank to enjoy at least another year. The bell above the door jingled, and Michael entered, no longer the nervous college boy, but a confident young man in a crisp suit. How's the new job? Ellie asked, as she poured his coffee. Challenging. Senator Collins runs a tight ship at the foundation. He glanced at her schedule, posted near the register. Speaking of which, your flight to DC is confirmed for next Tuesday. 3-day consulting trip. Ellie nodded. Her role as advisor to the burn survivor advocacy program fit neatly around her diner shifts. George had insisted she keep her waitressing job. This place wouldn't be the same without you, even as she'd begun building a new career. The Harrington scandal had dominated national headlines for weeks. Harold faced multiple charges, from arson to obstruction of justice. James had made a plea deal, testifying against his father in exchange for a reduced sentence. Most importantly to Ellie, the truth about the orphanage fire had finally come to light. Memorial services were held for the 3 children who hadn't survived. Their names now adorned a small stone monument where the orphanage once stood. The shopping center had been demolished. In its place, construction had begun on the St. Mary's Community Center, funded by the Harrington assets seized during the investigation. The afternoon sun was slanting through the windows when another visitor arrived. A dignified older woman, Ellie recognized instantly. Mrs. Abernathy, she greeted warmly. Your usual table. Actually, Mrs. Abernathy replied. I came to tell you they're here. Ellie rushed to the window. 4 black SUVs had pulled up outside. Frank emerged from the second vehicle, looking thin but standing straight without assistance. Senator Collins followed, along with several other men Ellie recognized from Frank's Korean War photograph. Your booth is ready, she told them as they entered. Coffee's fresh. Wouldn't miss Tuesdays at Sunny's for anything, Frank said, settling into what had become known as the veteran's booth. As she served them, Ellie noticed something different about the diner. The customers were watching her, but not with the pity or discomfort she'd grown accustomed to. Instead, there was respect in their eyes, even a touch of admiration. Later, as the afternoon stretched into evening, Michael lingered after the senators and officials had departed. I never properly apologized, he said quietly. For sitting silent all those times, James mocked you. That's long past, Ellie assured him. No, he insisted. I need to say it. I was a coward. I saw your scars, but I was blind to your courage. She touched her cheek reflexively, a habit that had diminished in recent months. These scars taught me something important, Michael. We're all burning in some way. Some of us just wear our flames on the outside. As dusk settled over the town, Frank remained in his booth, watching Ellie work with quiet pride. You know, he told her when she brought him a slice of apple pie. When I first came in here, I wasn't planning to live much longer. Frank, it's true. The cancer was just an excuse. I'd given up. He smiled gently. Then this waitress with burned scars showed me kindness when no one else would. Made me remember there are things worth fighting for. Ellie looked around the diner, at George calling orders through the kitchen window, at Mrs. Abernathy teaching young Timothy Collins how to play checkers, at Michael writing in his journal by the window. I just did what anyone would do, she said. Frank shook his head. That's where you're wrong, Ellie. Most people walk past suffering because it's easier than stopping to help. You walked into a burning building, twice. Outside, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, but inside Sunny's diner, the light was warm and steady, like the quiet strength of a young waitress who had once believed her scars defined her, only to discover they merely revealed who she had been all along. That's the end of the story. You know, scars tell 2 stories, the story of our wounds and the story of our healing. Ellie's burns weren't just marks of her past tragedy. They became proof of her courage. The world often judges by appearance, but true vision sees beyond the surface. Sometimes the most beautiful souls carry visible reminders of the fires they've walked through to save others. If you were in Ellie's position, would you have had the courage to keep showing up at the diner, despite the mockery? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched you, hit subscribe for more.